The year is 1983. Unknown to anyone at the time, a huge North American video game crash is looming. Video game companies are trying to squeeze as much money out of people as possible, seemingly releasing different versions of the same games and concepts over and over again. But there was one company who was about to break new boundaries, and surprising to some, that would be Atari with their game Star Wars, based on the smash hit film of the same name from 1977. The new take-in on an IP of this size and weight came with a huge responsibility, having to convince both George Lucas and the general public in an incredibly oversaturated market. It was time to think bigger and better than anything that came prior. From here, a team got to work on developing an iconic game. With a large budget and scope to be as imaginative as possible, the team started to develop all sorts of mad concepts for the game and cabinet, which quickly came together. Early on, both a sit-down and stand-up cabinet version went into development, which wasn't exactly common but not quite unusual back in 1983, with similar offerings for games like Pole Position in 1982. The designs for this cabinet were really elaborate. From early on, the designers knew what they wanted. The cabinet had to be fresh and unlike anything else on the market. The stand-up cabinet was super impressive. The unique bezel design by Ken Hatta is iconic, along with the cabinet's form factor and Jerry Liachik's yoke design. But what really made this game iconic was the cabinet design in its deluxe sit-down form factor. The designer Mike Jang went for a spaceship-like design, which gave a thrilling experience, which was a dream for Star Wars fans and piqued the interest of many different types of gamers, as seen by its huge sale figures for the time, being a centerpiece in many arcades. The game itself went on to sell over 12,000 cabinets combined between each form factor, which was actually really good for its time. But the version we're focusing on today, the deluxe sit-down cockpit, took all the best parts of the stand-up cabinet's offering and turned it into a surreal experience. It's probably something you have to play yourself to realise how great it is. To top it off, it has a brilliant gameplay experience. The game itself is a 3D vector game and was definitely one of the best vector games of all time. It was really imaginative and super high tech for its day. Its graphics were far beyond a lot of games for its time. In recent years, unfortunately, this has become a holy grail collector's item. It now sells for over €8,000 here in Europe. It has been way out of reach for me and many collectors now. This game came out 14 years before I was born, and the price has went from sky high to rock bottom, and now to prices that have probably exceeded what they originally went for, ignoring inflation. So over lockdown, I decided to do it. I decided to live the dream and get one. But not just go out and purchase one, as price wise they were way out of my league. So I took the plunge and decided to build one from scratch. First off, I decided to research the price and viability of this. Once I seen how feasible it was, I jumped at it and never looked back. I found the CNC cabinet plans online, sent them to my local CNC manufacturer, and went on to design some of the parts whilst I waited for the wood to be cut and shipped. I knew if I was to do this, I'd have to go beyond anything I'd ever did before, designing a lot of custom parts using a lot of trial and error. I redesigned the bezel in CAD. I used some online CAD drawings, edited these in CAD, and matched them to images I found online, and printed as much as I could in as little parts as possible. The parts came out great, they all fit together well, and I was able to use some artwork to cover some of the imperfections in it. Once everything was printed, it was time to put everything together. I also used sheet wood to design some of the larger parts so it would save time on printing. The CNC cut would arrive and the artwork arrived shortly after. It was soon time to start assembly. With probably 100 or so parts, I knew I was in trouble here. But I was already committed and had piled in too much money to look back, so on I went. First off, I fit things together. I decided to shape things up. I bought some clamps and seen how it would all fit together to try to figure out which parts went where. As nothing was labelled or numbered, it was a little bit like a jigsaw. But soon it started to fit together, and it was time to start working on one of the most important parts, the base. The base came together well, needing a lot of screws to ensure it was secure enough and stable enough to take the weight. Next came the side panels, again needing a lot of securing to ensure the stability of the cabinet. Once the sides were on, the back, the seat and all the parts that were next went on, constantly sizing up parts and making sure things were on track to fit well together. I also had to spray everything whilst I was doing this. Everything needed spray, and even the edges of parts that had stickers on them. The seat went together well, and I put in some of the wiring at this point. Next came the artwork. The artwork was really tricky, as it was a tricky piece to stick on. Getting it centered and getting it hung correctly was difficult, but we got there eventually. Finally came the bezel, control panel, the rest of the wiring, lighting and more. One of the last things to do was install the screen itself. I had planned to make this fully original at one point, but for now I went with a MAME setup and LCD. I was having some problems sourcing a spare CRT for the job and working boards. This cabinet originally used either a 25-inch Electrohome or a Wells Gardner 6100, so they're kind of difficult to track down now, so maybe that will be something I look at in the future, but for now I was happy with this design. The controller has outputs for USB and for an original setup too, so I have the option to convert this down the line at any point. Finally came the time to put the finishing touches on the cabinet, putting on the last panel, spraying the last parts. And finally we are here. It is absolutely fantastic to play the original game in its original form factor without having to spend an arm and a leg on it. It is really brilliant, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. It really is an amazing, iconic game, and has stood the test of time in my opinion. If you ever get a chance to play this game, especially in its original form factor, I highly recommend it. It really gives a glimpse into how things were at the height of the video game boom era, or bubble as some might call it, as this was the first boom that video games had really seen in both North America and the rest of the world. It is a great design, both aesthetically and software wise, having software designed by programmer Glenn Rivera. It really is something I never thought I'd own myself, and it goes to show if you really want something, you put your mind to it, anything is possible. Who knows, one day I might revisit this project and install an original PCB and CRT, but for now I'm just delighted to be able to play the game and experience this in its original form factor. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider liking the video and subscribing. Thank you.